Hello and welcome everybody. This is a very unusual, let's say, interview because I had a thought about interviewing authors after I'd written my book, and having done a lot of post-marketing, one of the things I was discovering was how difficult it is, or easy for some of us and not, about the marketing of the book. And I was interviewed on a podcast, which is coming out in August in America. And I thought, this would be a really lovely thing to do, to start interviewing different authors with different genres from Write That Book Masterclass. And so I met Ruth at a local cafe in Tain in the Highlands of Scotland. And we were chatting and I said, Ruth, maybe we should do something like this. And of course, what happened were two things. She got inspired to do something that she may mention in this recording. And I got inspired to start thinking about putting authors on a stage platform to talk about themselves and get more exposure for the books. So a very warm welcome to you, Ruth.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you.
Yes, sorry, Ruth, that was a bit of an introduction. And I'm just going to ask you some questions about your book, because I have read part of your book. I then dipped into various periods of your life, of the life of the, I'm going to call her the heroine, because to me she was a real heroine. So let's start off by telling listeners about yourself, where you're from and the genre that you write.
Okay. So I was originally born in West Bromwich in the West Midlands, which used to be part of Staffordshire. But when the counties changed lines I think it was in the early 1970s, it became West Midlands. I moved to the Highlands of Scotland in 2011, and I've lived there ever since. So that's how I came to be up in Scotland.
Okay.
And the genre that I chose to write about was a semi-autobiographical memoir. So some of the things in Wasn't Me, Miss are true, some are not. So it's for the reader to guess which is which.
Yes, so I'm going to have to try to work out which bit was true and which bit was not true. Fact or fiction makes it more interesting, doesn't it? Really. And yes. What I did read in your book that you came to Scotland. What was the main reason for coming to Scotland? Because, as you know, I live here as well.
We had been visiting the Highlands for it's got to be about 15 years, something like that, a little bit less than that. And every time we went home, it got harder and harder to want to go back, to make the journey back down south. We were living in Derbyshire at the time, and we just adored Sutherland and the freedom of the Highlands. It's a completely different world up here. And when you come to live in the Highlands, it's different again to being a tourist. Yes. So you find some great differences in life. And we just grew to love the area so much. Every holiday was being spent in the Highlands, particularly in Sutherland. And in 2011, I managed to get a job working in 2 local schools, and that's how I came to actually move up to the Highlands.
Okay, because your previous work was what?
I was previously a head teacher in the West Midlands.
Okay, and
I've been teaching for 27 years when I left the Midlands.
Right, that's the question I was going to ask you. How long have you been teaching? So you are a really experienced teacher, very experienced. And I say that because I actually taught for 2 years primary school in North London. I never survived it, so I have to applaud you for all those years of teaching. Yeah. And
yeah, well, in total it was 35 years that I taught.
Wow.
But if you've read the book, you'll know that I've been involved in education since I was 2.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I must say that the first 3 chapters of your book, I absolutely loved them. I heard this amazing voice recounting your early childhood, your mother's life, how you went to what I call nursery, and how you read at a very early age. And tell us just a little bit about that early part of the story.
Yeah, so mom was working class background. She had got married. She was about 20 when she got married, and she thought she'd found the love of her life, who turned out not to be the love of her life. Um, my dad was having an affair with another lady, and she found herself a single mum. And in 1963, when I was born, that was quite a different world for ladies. Ladies were expected to be married. You didn't get very many single moms in those days, and so she'd always wanted to be a teacher, but circumstances had meant that she couldn't become a teacher, and she trained to be a teacher 10 years after she should have been at college. So she went to college, and then I was about 5 or 6 when she started, and so I saw what she had to go through to qualify, and then yeah, she met my stepdad, and we had a lovely life with my stepdad, and I had a brother as well that was born. So yeah, in terms of going to school, I started at school when I was 2, because mom was an unqualified teacher in those days, and that we were lucky that, again, the days were so different because head teachers were not guided by all the rules that Ofsted have now and education departments, and I was able to go to school when I was 2. And I played in what was called the Wendy house when everybody else was working in the class. Mom was an infant teacher, so yeah, I've known school all of my life.
Wow, I must say, for those who are listening, the first 4 chapters of Ruth's book, I really felt I was there with her. Everything that was happening to all the characters, the life of a little girl going to the school, playing in the Wendy house, her mother, I would say a really brave and determined and resourceful woman. So an amazing woman, actually. And I would say that all of that has rubbed off onto you, Ruth, just reading through your book. Yeah, very resourceful, very determined, and extremely creative as well. What is your book about, and how did you come to give it the title that you gave it?
Okay, so the background to the story is that every school I worked at, and I worked at about 7 schools, I think it was, everyone I worked at, something funny happened or something sad, or there were all sorts of events. And I would, as I moved school, I would tell some of the stories in staff rooms. And on many occasions, people would say, why don't you should write that book? Why don't you write a book about all of the things that you're telling us? And as I went through and I got to be a head teacher, people would say it again, and I just decided one day, I saw Michael Heppel's pop-up group come along, and the title was going to be, it was actually going to be Black Country Speak, which would have been War Me Miss, because that's how the children speak down there. But somebody in Write That Book, when we were doing the pop-up challenge, said, I think you need to go a little bit, I think it needs to be a bit more standard English than in the Midlands. So it wasn't Me Miss, was a posher version.
Okay.
But the title was always going to be that. It was always going to be Wasn't Me Miss, because I've heard it so many times in every single school I've worked in. Yeah, that's why it was.
So just give me an example of one occasion when a child would say, it wasn't me, miss. What had that little child done to say, it wasn't me, miss?
Well, the famous story in the book is a lad, and obviously changed his name in the story. And he came from quite an impoverished background, and he and his little sister were starving. I think there were about 7 or 8 kids in the family, and they would come to school, and their jumpers were quite threadbare. They were really struggling little family. And back in the very early 80s, some of the benefits weren't about that there might be now, and some definitely not the food banks and things like that. So this little family came to school and they were hungry. And one day I'd got my sandwiches in my bag. I had gone to the staff room for having a coffee at break time in the morning. Never missed my sandwiches when I came back. And the little boy had stolen, well, we're guessing that the little boy stole my sandwiches for his sister who was hungry. And I think he realised that I knew. I never let on to him. He wasn't in my class. He was an older boy, a junior boy in the school. And he just came up to me one day and says, "Wasn't me, miss." And the reason I wanted to call the story "Wasn't Me, Miss," and the example that I've given is about children like that. Some of the stories in the book are not all funny. There's some quite serious topics in there as well that I came across, like child poverty. And so it was important for me to get that message across, not just my funny stories.
Yeah. Yes, because I noticed that you go through quite a variety of schools and the types of schools and your experiences, but I don't want to spoil that too much for the reader. So I know you mentioned earlier that some of the teachers in the staff room said maybe you should write a book, but what made you want to write this title? What was driving you to write this?
I'd always had, and it's a bit of a cliche to say that, you know, lots of people say, I've wanted to write since I was a little girl, and I did. I liked reading, I liked writing, and I wanted to write a book. But then life happened. Life got in the way. I went to college. I was working really hard, got married, all the stuff that goes with marriage. And I just, I didn't get the time. And then when I retired, it was, we went almost into lockdown straight away after I'd retired, national lockdown. And I was twiddling my thumbs, and we'd come out of lockdown again, and I saw Michael Heppel's write that book pop up. Just by chance. It was a Davina McCall podcast called Making the Cut with her partner Michael Douglas, and I just saw the advert for it, and I didn't think anything to it. I thought, oh, I've always wanted to write a book. I wonder if this is the chance I've got. And I just thought, it's not going to be the chance. But you know what? It was just destiny, and I did write that book.
Yeah. And why do you think it is important for you to have written this book?
For a number of reasons. If you have read the book, you'll know a little bit more of my background that I have talked about. And there is something that I wanted to get out there in the very early chapters that I've mentioned already. And it was quite cathartic for me to get that out. And also I wanted to share some of the humorous things, the sad things that that happened to me. So the book wrote itself because I was just driven to write it. I had to write it, and I can't explain why. I can't put it into words properly, but I just had to write the book.
And roughly, how long did it take you to write it, think it through, get it prepared, putting the first words on paper to the end?
Okay, so from the beginning of Michael Heppel's pop-up challenge, that first one in October 21, I think it was, until the publication in July 22. So it was about 9 months. So I class it as my baby. And I wrote it in about 4 or 5 months. And then there was editing, and then there was how to make it into a book, getting it printed and published. So I say 9 months is the proper answer to everything of it.
So. And who are your favorite character or characters in the story that you wrote, and what was special about them? I picked up on a few that really meant a lot to you, but I'd like you to tell us.
Oh gosh, there's so many. There was a little boy in the story that was in one of the chapters, and I think it was probably chapter 7, I think it was. and he, in real life, he amused me. He could have been really irritating in your class. You know, he'd call out and he'd act a bit of a daft thing and do all sorts of things. But he just I just loved his character, and he's the one who told me that his mom. He said he'd been to prison. And I said, you haven't been in prison. You can't have been in prison. And he said, I have. I've been in my mummy's tummy in prison. And he was the kind of little lad that I took away on a residential, and he hadn't got a clue how to eat with a knife and fork. And I just adored spending some time with him and giving him some life opportunities that he perhaps wouldn't have had.
Yeah.
So I like those kind of characters. I always like some of the interesting characters in class, rather than the ones that would always do well and always tried their best.
Yeah.
I used to try to help some of the children who perhaps didn't have the best start.
Yeah. Yeah. Those children stay with you for life, don't they?
Yes, yes, they do.
And I often find that they really mold the way you view your own life and their life. And it's interesting to hear you say that, because many years ago when I was teaching, only for a couple of years, about maybe 20 years later, I was in a shopping centre in John Lewis in Brent Cross, North London. And I heard this voice call out to me, Miss, Miss. I turned around, I looked at this young woman and I thought, can't it be? I couldn't quite recognize her, but she came up to me. She asked me how I was. And I said, what is your name? And she told me, she said, oh my God, I remember that little girl. She was 8 when I last saw her, 8 or 9. And she always said to me, I always wanted to know what had happened to her. And she'd grown to this beautiful young woman and had done well in her life. Yeah. And she's always been with me. And what about any other character that helped you to become the teacher that you became? Who was there one that was really influencing in your life and the way you viewed teaching and stayed in teaching?
Oh gosh, I think I met so many inspirational people and members of staff, but one sticks out in particular. It was a lady who happened to be my mum's friend at school. They weren't best friends, they just knew one another as acquaintances, and they met at grammar school. Mum went to grammar school, and she was my first junior teacher. And I loved being in her class. I hadn't had a particularly nice experience in being in infants. And she as I say, I seemed to blossom in her class. I remember learning to write stories, and she would read some lovely books in the class, and she was just a kind lady. And then many years later, I was lucky enough to have her as a colleague. So I worked at the school where she was, and even though now she's in her 80s, and I've just actually ordered her birthday present today, we're still friends and we're in contact. So yeah, she was inspirational to me.
Yeah. I did notice that there were a few other teachers that you met, French teacher as an example.
Oh yeah. My French teachers are, I'm still in contact with them. And yes, I loved the kindness that they shared and how supportive they were. And one French teacher in particular, I was absolutely useless for some reason at dictation, and when I was doing my O-levels, and she took me aside and gave me some support and extra lessons she offered me. And I've never forgotten that kindness, really. And she, I sent her and her colleague a copy of Wasn't Me, Miss, and they both absolutely adored it and couldn't believe that I'd remembered them. And yeah.
I mean, there's so much in your book. We could talk for hours on this topic. Before I carry on, there was one thing about there was something that made you want to tell people about maybe the school system. Was it an Ofsted situation that took place and that you really felt moved to want to in a way, not expose it, but to let people know about the importance for you about being a teacher and how the children should be treated.
Yeah, I mean, when you're teaching, you have you're not really allowed to have a political voice. In fact, I've been told you are not allowed to say how you're going to vote or anything like that. You have to stay impartial.
Mm.
And so for 35 years, and for most of, not all of it, but for most of that time, Ofsted was around, and inspectors were around before that as well, but not like Ofsted. And the system was done to us. The inspections were done to us. Nowadays, it is a little bit different, but there is still quite a lot of controversy over Ofsted. And yeah, I was lucky enough to go through several Ofsted experiences. Some of them were positive, some of them were not so positive. And I worked in a school where we barely scraped through. And then I also worked in a school where we were failing. And I'd moved there a term after I'd moved there. We went into what was called special measures in those days, and it was horrendous. It was an horrendous time. And my husband, who is now, he's always said, I don't know how we stuck together through that time, because it was so difficult for you. So yeah, I wanted to say something about the system now that I've retired. And yes, it was all about striving to be excellent. And I found that I think that it's not about being excellent. It's about giving children the best life chances you possibly can. It's not about being graded an outstanding teacher or an outstanding school. If you're not kind and you treat children as little robots, then what's the point?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I wanted to get that message across, that there's more to education, or should be, and what a child gets than an Ofsted grading in a school. And let's face it, how many parents actually look at those gradings and understand them? So
yeah. And which part of your story moved you the most?
oh
Take a deep breath.
yeah, moved me the most. There's so many parts. The little boy I've talked about already, being starving, he stuck in my mind. There was a little boy at the same school who ended up carjacking people in real life. And he was in my very first class at school, and I've never forgotten him. And the violence that he showed, but he showed violence because he was being racially abused. I'm convinced he was being racially abused in school. He was the only Afro-Caribbean child with his sister in the school. And the area that I worked in my very first school was extremely racist area, practically all white. And yeah, I felt really sorry for him and what he went through. So that first school was really, I met some real sad cases and some funny cases in that school.
That's life, isn't it? So just to kind of change the mood a little bit, how does it feel knowing that people all around the country, and maybe some in other countries, are reading your story and connecting with what you've written? How do you feel about that?
It feels surreal. Now I pick the book up. It's like, did I write that? Did I actually write that? And then as part of, and it was about this time last year, people started posting on Facebook the photograph of them holding the book somewhere. Somebody was on holiday, somebody was in their garden, and I had somebody post it in America, and it just feels surreal that I wrote that book, and what's happened since I wrote Wasn't Me, Miss. I just still can't believe it. I can't put it into words. It's a really strange experience, and I'm proud of writing it, and I'm glad I wrote it, but I don't believe I did.
I know it must be a feeling that's still quite difficult to fully absorb and integrate, but it's a huge achievement. You know, for any of us to write a book, it's not easy. There's so much. A girlfriend of mine said to me, "How can I possibly write a review? You've written a whole book. There's so much in that book. Where do I begin to even review?" So it's an awesome achievement, I think, for all the authors who write a book of any genre. Outside of writing, what else do you have time for, Ruth?
I have, well, writing is part-time, believe it or not.
Okay.
I have 4 dogs, so they need walking and looking after and cuddling and a husband
Okay.
and what life brings me. But my big passion, apart from writing, is photography. I've always liked taking pictures, but I'm an amateur. But since I picked up a more professional camera, I like taking photographs, particularly of the night skies in Sutherland and Ross-shire and Caithness.
Yes, I've seen a few actually. They're wonderful.
Yeah, so I like I'm quite an aurora chaser. We look for the aurora alerts and off we go, or the night skies, the Milky Way, and
Yeah.
I like the freedom and the quietness, and when I'm looking through a lens, it takes me into a totally different world. And I just find some peace that I don't find anywhere else. And I can't explain it unless you're a photographer, but
Yeah.
it's just, I just love looking through the lens.
Well, it's very much like writing, is it not? You are isolated or not lonely, just in your own world, and you're separate, and you are on one side of the lens and you're looking into the other side. And the same thing with writing. You're holding that pen and there's that paper or your computer. You're one side and that's the other. And you connect. And I think I love photography as well. So I totally understand how you feel about that. It's that association and disassociation at the same time. Yeah. And the space and the quietness of the whole thing. Yeah. It's a wonderful feeling. Thank you for that. I see you have 2 further books and 4th one's about to be published. So you've been very busy.
Yeah. So I've got 2 books that have been published and one it's sort of out there. I just got the opportunity to put some and have a reading at a local market, and so technically it's not published, but it is in the world already. So yes.
Yeah.
I didn't think I would write a children's book, but an opportunity came up, and so I wrote a children's book. That was the 3rd book. The second one was some poetry that I just had lying around that I'd written years and years ago, most of it.
Yeah.
And then the 4th book, again, circumstances happened, and I wrote another children's book.
So are you being drawn towards writing more children's books, do you think, from all the experience you've had?
Well, I always said I was never gonna work with children again or write a children's book, although that had been my childhood dream to write children's books. So it's quite interesting that it's quite interesting that I've moved towards children. I can't explain why, but I get quite a joy out of it. And I did a reading. I've done some readings in schools, and I have also done a reading at a fair where my book was actually launched, the latest one. And I do still like working with children, even though probably the end of Wasn't Me, Mrs. Tells You Not. I found a joy in reading again with children.
So how do you see your writing career or your writing process taking you? Do you have any plans, or do you think they'll just become organic and just take you where you least expect to go?
Yeah, well, what I've found is I don't like being put in a box. I don't like successful authors. They seem to they're writing detective stories or they're writing memoirs, but I found that I don't like being in a box. So I've written an autobiographical fiction-y sort of book.
Mm-hmm.
It's the first one. Poetry book, 2 children's books.
Yeah.
But my 4th one that I'm 77,000 words into is a murder mystery.
Okay.
And that has started to go to beta readers for the first 4 chapters. So that's the plan. And then somebody set me off on a Write That Book person has set me off on a little challenge for Christmas.
Okay.
Will I write another children's book about a certain topic?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's got me thinking and starting to evolve with some ideas about that as well. Around autism. It's about autism.
Okay.
So
yeah, I do love the way I'm seeing other authors when they've written their book, where it's taking them to probably places they would never ever have expected to have gone. So I will be watching you with interest and seeing where your book writing is going to be taking you. For those of you who haven't read Ruth's book, there is one chapter that I really liked, and I would say that Ruth, from what my senses, is a very unusual woman. And what I liked about it was reading about her wedding and what she wore for her wedding. So, Ruth, please tell us about your lovely clothes that you wore for your wedding, and your husband as well.
Okay, so I'd always wanted, romantically, I don't know where it came from, I'm not sure, but I always wanted to get married in a castle. And I wasn't sure if that would happen, but we got a castle, we organised that. And this castle was over 1,000 years old. And I could have gone for the traditional wedding dress of the day, but I decided, me being a little bit different, I wanted to have a medieval wedding dress. Well, it couldn't be authentically medieval. That would have to go come from a museum. So I was searching around and I managed to find a lady tailor on eBay who made dresses to order. So I took all my measurements that she wanted, and this dress just came about, and it was beautiful. It was the sleeves that I wanted. I wanted the long fancy sleeves of the medieval times, and I had a floral thing around my head, a headdress round. And and we got married. My mom made a Saxon sort of outfit for a tunic for my husband that matched. I just got some of the gold banding that was on my wedding dress, and we got married in this castle. And there was a tourist outside. I think she was from Canada. I think it was Canada or America. And the museum curator was standing outside watching us, and this tourist came up and said, "What's going on?" And they said, "It's the first Saxon wedding in 1,000 years," or something like that, in this castle. So it was funny. And there we were. We got all sorts of modern day stuff as well. Boots from quite an iconic shop in Birmingham, where the punks used to hang out. My husband got his boots from there, and it just evolved. But my eBay dress, instead of costing thousands of pounds, cost about, I think it was 120 quid or something like that off eBay, and it was okay.
So how would you feel about posting that on Facebook for all the readers to see?
Oh, well, it's on my private Facebook page, but I suppose I could actually put that on. I like it. It probably looked stupid, but I liked it at the time.
Okay, let's see the next few hours or days your wedding photo. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, okay, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I think we've come to the end, and thank you, Ruth, for talking about your book. As a person involved in education as well, although a very long time ago, not for as long as you, I did love so many of the stories and all the anxieties and the triumphs, the tribulations that you went through, and your growth and your becoming an amazing teacher, and your love of teaching from a very young age as well. So congratulations on your book and also on your further books, and looking forward to your next children's book as well. And how can listeners get to follow you and your book, or I should say books now? Where would they find that?
Okay, I've got a website, which is rkjadams.com. I write under that name, which is my initials. And then I've also got a private Facebook page. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm on this new Threads. I'm trying
Oh,
to get hold of this new Threads. So
okay.
if you just look for RKJ Adams, you will find me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me today, and look forward to talking with you for another time. And thank everybody for listening. And I hope that you really enjoyed hearing how Ruth came to write a book and what it was about and the influences that it has formed for her life as well. Thank you, and see you all again. Bye for now. Thank you, Ruth. Bye.
Okay.